Now, when we think of the martial arts, we may think of movies, of TV, of people jumping about, high kicks, sweeping kicks, but martial arts, how good is it for someone who is blind or partially sighted as, say, a method of self-defense, and can it also help with other areas of your life? Well, Stefan Verstappen is in Toronto, and Stefan has been involved in training people with visual impairments. Stefan, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Allan, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Stefan, first of all, tell me a little bit about your background in the martial arts. How did you get involved, and what kind of things have you done?
Well, I started martial arts when I was a young boy, starting off in judo and then going to karate and taekwondo. And eventually I ended up going down to Toronto's Chinatown to study the kung fu version of martial arts because it was an older tradition and had a lot more mythology and symbolism and internal practices. And I studied in Chinatown for about 3 years, and I became quite interested in the whole Oriental culture. So then my friend and I decided to travel to China and find some teachers there that could teach us. We decided to go for 6 months. We took a leave of absence from our job. But once we got there, we liked it so much, I ended up staying there 4 years and studying Kung Fu in Hong Kong and in Taipei, mainland China. Then we went to Thailand and studied Thai boxing, Korea, studied Taekwondo. So I have a pretty rounded background in martial arts.
But as you say, that goes beyond the martial art itself. You're looking beyond that.
Well, I was always more interested in the spiritual aspects of martial arts. Not to say that I don't enjoy a good full contact fighting match, and I tried to get as many in as I could. But I was really more interested in the other aspects, the life-enhancing portions of martial arts that included the mind and body as well.
So apart from keeping someone fit, keeping someone safe, does it have other benefits to enhance someone's life?
Well, in the older traditions, when you read some of the founding books and the books written by great martial artists in the past, for example, like Miyamoto Musashi, who was Japan's greatest swordsman, and he wrote a book called The Book of Five Rings, and he was undefeated in his lifetime, and probably the most famous martial artist in Japan in the medieval period. But when he wrote about martial arts, a lot of what he wrote about was the internal aspects. Now, in martial arts, you have a division which they call the external and the internal. And the external is that which you can see. So if you throw a punch or a kick, or you flex your muscles, or you jump in the air, that's the external. The internal involves the way your mind operates at the time that you're doing martial arts. Probably more important even than the external is the internal. It's the way you handle your emotions, the way you handle your attention, your focus. And this includes things like breathing and meditation or relaxation techniques, the way you improve your senses and your perceptions. I found that part to be the most fascinating because despite how many times or how good you are at throwing a punch or a kick, all that comes to nothing if your mind is not focused.
So when you returned from your travels, did you begin teaching?
I lived in a small town in Ontario, and a local newspaper wrote an article about me. A local boy comes back from China, and I was teaching at the community center, and I received a phone call from a woman who asked me if I could teach her. I said, sure, anyone can learn martial arts. It was only after that she informed me she was blind and asked me again, can you teach someone who is blind? I hate to make a hypocrite out of myself, so I said, well, I think I can, but I don't know, to be honest with you. But if you're willing to give it a try, so am I, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Was that a bit of a shock to you when someone got in touch with you who couldn't see? Because I would imagine that most people would think martial arts are a very visual thing and you really need your eyes to perform.
For me, I didn't want to say, no, I couldn't teach you, because it's really not my decision to make. I mean, I'm not an expert on what people can or cannot do. Every individual is unique, and they all have their own capabilities. So I wasn't going to just, imperiously say, no, it's impossible to teach you. There is a precedent in martial arts history, in the older writings, where they do show that blind people are capable of learning martial arts. For example, in competitions, there is a type of contest called randori, which is a Japanese word which means busy making or chaotic making. And this consists of a person standing in the middle of the mat and having several people come up to him and attack them one after another. And then the person is supposed to defend against them. To prove how skilled the practitioner is, they are often blindfolded. So the fact that some practice is done blindfolded seems to indicate that perhaps blind people could learn martial arts.
So the belief was obviously there, but were things going through your mind? How to actually physically show someone how to perhaps perform some of the moves, or how can I sort of enhance them physically and mentally?
Well, that was the tricky part, because this is all in theory. All the people that were, for example, those that did do martial arts blindfolded, of course, learned martial arts with their eyes open. So once you had learned it, then putting on a blindfold, defending against attackers, was probably a lot easier than if you had to learn it blind, or learn it while you were blind to begin with. So the technique for teaching was, well, I had no technique for teaching. I didn't know what to do. And I called around and to some of the local blind academies here, or blind institutions, and asked for their guidance, and no one could tell me anything. Nobody had ever heard of anyone teaching the blind martial arts. This was not that long ago. It was in 1990, so it was 22 years ago. And yet nobody I could find had ever taught the blind martial arts. So I sort of came into the situation blind as well. Well, the first meeting was a little bit awkward. I'd actually never met a blind person before, and so I was unsure of what to say and do. And she, of course, had never met a martial arts instructor before, so she was a little bit unsure of what to say and do. But I started at the beginning. I interviewed her, and I tried to find out what it was that she wanted to get out of martial arts. She wanted to get over her fear. Now, I think that was a natural reaction. She was a 38-year-old woman. She wasn't in good physical shape. She was diabetic, and she lost her sight due to diabetic retinopathy. She lived alone in a rural town with her 9-year-old daughter, who was sighted and went to school by herself and came home. And she spent most of the day in the house alone. She didn't have any friends, no family. She was terrified to go outside by herself. And she was terrified for a couple of reasons. One was that the obvious fear of being a blind woman in the world and being probably a perfect target for any predators that might be in the area. So she wanted to learn self-defense so that she could get over her fear of being attacked, or at least gave her the feeling that she would have some options of what to do if she were attacked. So I said, well, fine, we can, experiment with the self-defense, and we'll see what we can produce from that and try to increase your confidence that way. But the other fear she had was she had a sense of vertigo. Her balance, her posture, her sense of proprioception were all completely underdeveloped. She had a difficulty walking alone. She would get dizzy and feel that she had to fall down, or that she would fall down. So combined with the fear of being attacked was the fear of being out alone by yourself. It's almost like a form of agoraphobia, where they're afraid to be out in the open. She could not maintain her balance unless she had some sort of solid object to hold on to, such as a chair, the back of a chair, or holding onto a wall. So for her to go out the front door and walk down the street was impossible. One of the first things we did was to train her in balance and grounding. In the martial arts, grounding is a general term that refers to not only your footwork, but also your stance, the way you walk, your locomotion, and your ability to center your center of gravity and lower it so that you feel more solid on your feet. There is a story often told about the founder of Aikido, whose name was Morihei Ueshiba. And even at the age of 82 and being merely 100 pounds, he would have larger students, 2 or 3 or 4 of them, line up and try to push him off his feet. But his expertise at what the martial arts terms as grounding was so good that he could sink his weight, sink his center of gravity, and even larger, burly men could not push him off his feet. So we began with grounding to get her solid on her feet. And we used all the old kung fu techniques, such as the horse stance, whereby you stand with your legs apart, you bend your knees, and then you sink your center of gravity, and you feel your weight through the soles of your feet. It's a very simple exercise, and people overlook it, think, well, this can't accomplish anything. But in the kung fu tradition, the first thing they teach you is to stand in this horse stance and to maintain this stance for 10, 20 minutes, which is a grueling exercise. But the benefits from that type of grounding exercise is quite amazing because you are very solid. Your balance is much more improved and unlikely to trip and fall or feel off balance. Then we went on to other techniques such as Tai Chi walking, which is a way of locomotion which is very gentle, very grounded again, but very smooth. You walk by landing on the heel of your foot, rolling off the edge of your foot, and springing off the ball. These two techniques and a few others, such as walking the beam, like a balance beam, we practiced that with Susan, and those produced almost instantaneous benefits. Within a month, she was able to walk around without a cane, without holding onto a wall, without having to have somebody to hang on to. She was completely independent. So the first fear, the agoraphobia, or the fear of leaving her house, was easily accomplished with these simple exercises from Kung Fu.
Once she had that grounding, did you move on to sort of what we think of as the martial arts side of things, looking at protection?
Well, we sort of trained all those things at once. We first did the grounding, and that took about a month. And then she became much more solid, and so we could begin the second portion, which was the self-defense techniques. The self-defense techniques, I thought, well, we'll see what she can learn. I don't think there's much we can do about it, but let's try. But it turns out she was able to learn everything I could teach her. Because with a self-defense technique, in order for a person to attack you, they have to come and touch you and grab a hold of you and come within, a foot of you. Once a person is that close to you, using some sensory enhancement techniques, such as improving her auditory perception, improving her olfaction, her ability to smell someone close to her, and also what we called touch sensitivity, meaning that she would be able to sense by just the way an attacker grabs you or holds you, you can then sense where their body will be and create a mental image of that person. Now, once you had that mental image, it would be as if you could see them, and she could counterattack and defend herself against those types of attacks. So the very fact that somebody would have to come within touching distance to attack you meant that a blind person could defend themselves against that attacker.
Stefan, you've told us a little bit about working with the student and starting basically from the very beginning, teaching balance techniques and understanding the environment. Is that perception of the environment very important? Was that something you had to work on when you were, say, going outside of the house?
Perception is what I call like your early warning system, gathering information about the world around you through your senses. Most humans are vision intensive. In other words, we rely on our vision for most of the information we get from the world. So in order to find ways of providing more information about the world around you, I focused on techniques that come from Zen and yoga and meditation to help improve hearing, the sense of smell, and sense of touch, so that the more information you can get about your environment, the greater understanding of what is out there. So one of the things that I found was really helpful was what I called a walking lesson. We would simply go for a walk. And while we went for a walk, I would ask her questions about the environment to see if she could sense not only where she was in terms of orientation, but also what is going on around her. So we developed an exercise called audio indexing. For example, if you're walking down the street and you hear footsteps behind you, could you tell if those footsteps belong to a man or a woman? Most of us can't do that. And the reason we can't is because we simply never took the time to learn the difference those sounds make. For Susan, she would go for a walk, and then, we would walk past the park, and you might hear some rustling in the bushes. Well, what made that rustling in the bushes? If you were a sighted person, you would turn around and see what it was that was in the bushes. Maybe it was a dog chasing after a ball, or maybe it was a squirrel, or maybe it was an attacker hiding in there. The reason you can't tell what those sounds are is because you didn't take the time to identify them. With Susan, her hearing was perfectly normal. She could hear all these different sounds, but she could not differentiate what those sounds were. And so even though she heard a lot of activity within her environment, that information didn't do her any good because she couldn't place it. Part of the audio indexing or the auditory indexing was to walk through the type of route she would take, say, to go to the store, and to listen to all the sounds, and then me as a sighted person to identify those sounds for her. Once she was able to identify those sounds, then she could tell if there was 2 people or 3 people or 1 person walking behind her based on the sound of the footsteps, because now she had learned to recognize those sounds. And it was a very simple process, and once those sounds were identified, she was able to remember them and recognize them after that. So that was one of the immediate benefits of going for the walking exercise, was that now she could walk down the street and understand what those noises meant that were going on around her.
So you've worked on the physical side of things, and you've worked on sort of perceiving your surroundings. What stage did you finish at with her? What was the change that you noticed from the beginning to the end?
In the beginning, I thought she was not going to be very successful. She had no training in orientation or mobility or any other adaptive uses for her blindness. The difference from the beginning to the end was remarkable, from being a timid woman that sat alone in the house in the dark by herself all day, to being able to go out into the street, to be able to walk with her neighbors, to overcoming her fear not only of being outside by herself and getting around, but also her fear of being attacked. I taught her all the self-defense techniques that I would teach anyone else that was sighted, and she had no problems learning any of them. I also experimented with a little bit of sword fighting, just for the sake of fun. One day I asked her, I said, "Listen, would you like to do some sword fighting?" And she said, "Sure, I'd love to." So we took some padded sticks that would represent swords, and I would attack her. I said, "I'm going to attack you, and I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to attack you, and these are the ways that you would use a stick to defend yourself, and we'll just see what happens." I don't know if it was intuition or if it was some sort of sixth sense, but when I attacked her with the padded stick, she was able to defend herself 70% of the time, which is better than average chance. So something more was at work there. And not only that, she was able to attack me with the stick in return. I taught her how to twirl the stick in front of you in the figure 8 pattern that you see in the movies, and she had no problem learning how to do that. And then listening to where my position was on the mat, she would literally chase me around the dojo with the stick twirling in front of her, and everybody just ripped and roared with laughter when she would chase me around the room. Because, of course, if I didn't defend myself, she would have hit me pretty hard. Even though it was a padded stick, I would have gotten a good smack from it. You know, I don't want to say that it was a supernatural skill that she learned, but there was certainly something going on there that she was able to pick up on and use.
Did it then grow your confidence for teaching other people who are blind or partially sighted?
She made an amazing turnaround. Her life improved. She was going out. She felt confident. She was going to the store by herself. She was meeting the neighbors. She was even going to pick up her daughter at the school. And she felt her fear was pretty much gone by the end of the 9 months of training that we went through. So I thought, if this woman could make that much progress, then I'm sure that other blind people could make just as much progress. And I'm very positive about the benefits that martial arts training could provide.
Stefan, it's a fascinating story. We don't have time to go into everything in great detail, but if people would like more information and want to find out more from you, how can they go about doing that?
I have a website. It's chinastrategies.com. You can listen to my audiobook. The introduction is available online, and the audiobook is available for purchase. It just came out, and it should be available on audible.com.
Stefan Verstappen, thank you for speaking with us on Insight Radio.
Thank you so much for having me on, Allan. I really appreciate it.